just hit record. Um, yeah, so thanks for joining. Do you prefer that I call you like Principal Trust, or I call you Joe? Like, what do you prefer us to call you?
Joe is fine. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no problem.
Okay, so it's funny because in the East Coast, like we in Philadelphia, everyone's Principal whatever, like Principal Andrew. So I'm just like I'm so used to
Yeah,
saying it, so I'm like I also want to
yeah.
make sure you're comfortable. But
I
yeah, so
definitely noticed that. Yeah, for sure. But it's all good. Informal is good. No problem.
yes, perfect. So again, thanks for agreeing to talk to us for a little bit. There's so many people that were like really interested in joining, but there's lots of meetings going on. Of course, you know that there are lots of folks that are in school. So I'll record this and of course share it with you, but I'll also share it with the rest of us. And this is really informal. I have a few questions for you just so we can talk, and then everybody else can ask questions too as they pop up. So
Okay.
that's fine with you. We'll go ahead and get started.
Sounds good.
All right. So before we learn more about you, I would love for LE folks to just give a quick whip around about like where they are, their name, their role, or something like that. A little quick whip share. So who wants to start?
I can start just because of the silence. I am Kelsey McLaughlin, and I am an instructional leadership coach in the New Orleans area. I'm excited.
All right. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
My name is Ariana, and I'm a data and evaluation manager. I am located in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm very interested in learning more about equity.
Awesome. Nice to meet you.
Hi, my name's Brielle. I am the Associate Director on our Network 3 team and support our projects in Chicago and Grand Rapids, Michigan, and also based out of the DC area.
Hi, I'm Tina. I'm in Grand Rapids and I'm a leadership coach here.
I'm Rebecca. I'm located in Chicago and I support the network strategy team and our president.
Hey, I'm Precious. I am on the program innovation team with Ebony, and I'm excited to hear all you have to say about all the stuff that's happening at your school.
All right.
Hi, Joe. Kim Andrews. My team works on our partnerships in Tulsa Public Schools and a new emerging partnership with Summit Learning, and I'm based in Columbia, South Carolina. Really appreciate your time.
All right, thanks you guys. So I guess the first question I could ask you, Joe, is just like, how did you or what led you or compelled you to become a school leader? Can you tell us a little bit about your path?
Sure. So I was a teacher first. A long time ago, once upon a time, I wanted to go into medicine and study science and all of that. And sometime in undergrad, I found my history and history that I had never learned about, both just being a Black person in the U.S. and then also just a lot of hidden and untold story of folks from the continent of Africa. Learned about social justice issues and social justice work and activism work, and that led me into teaching specifically. So I was a Spanish teacher for a long time, and just even while I was a Spanish teacher, I was really teaching culture and empowerment and ethnic studies, under the guise and under the facade of Spanish, right? Whatever you want to call it. I was trying to teach young people to know more about themselves and to believe more in themselves and to do something about making the world a better place. So then that led me into leadership and thinking that, well, that's cool. I can do some things in the classroom, but what about outside the class? What about the larger school? If things are cool in my classroom, but they're not cool down the hall, and if we're not doing the right stuff at a school at large, that led me into thinking about the big school, the curricular decisions, what were our priorities, what our values were, what we were doing with our time. And that led me into school leadership. And now I'm wrapping up the 4th year of being at a middle school, trying to apply all these things that I was talking about, all the things that I thought were so easy, to just go in and make things better and change things. Now I'm working, really in the work with real adults and real kids, and real resources, and trying to fill in the gaps. But ultimately, just trying to make school a place that kids want to be at. Number one, and number two, a place that's actually going to affirm them and help them be a better version of themselves, and also really just teach them who they really are, to fight back these narratives that they're often told about who they are and who they're supposed to be, what's expected of them and what's not.
Yes, I love it. Could you tell now? Am I pronouncing the school? Is it Visitation? Am I saying that?
Yeah, it's kind of spelled like Visitación,
Oh,
because it has a original Spanish name, but it is Visitation, at least how it's pronounced now.
so like it's in San Francisco. Like, could you tell us about like the community, this like the demographics of like not only the students and families, but like even your teachers? Because I think that when we talk about coaching for equity or leading for equity, it's sometimes complex depending upon even like the staff makeup, not just the students. So could you tell us a little bit about Visitation in those terms?
Yeah, so it's in San Francisco. It's in the public school district. So it's a regular old public school. There's some of those still around. And it's a city school too, right? It's definitely an urban school in the sense that it's a big city. San Francisco's a small, maybe with numbers, but it's a densely populated city. Like San Francisco has these huge skyscrapers and innovation and tech companies, tech boom, and all that kind of stuff. But somewhere in the shadows, there's still poor folks of color living here as well, and they go to school too. And our school is literally on the margin of the map. It's literally on the margin of the city, just of where we're located. We're like way on the southernmost side of the city, close to some of the only still existing public housing in San Francisco. Like by areas, square footage, the largest public housing location in the city. So a lot of our kids still live in government housing. Also serves, mainly kids of color. I mean, probably like 99.5% kids of color, 70, 80% low income kids, 40, 50, 60 Spanish speaking kids, maybe 40% immigrant kids new to the country. So, it's a mix of a lot of things. And also just where we're located, still one of the only tough neighborhoods in San Francisco. It's probably only like 2 or 3 neighborhoods that are still tough. And, that just means, impoverished, high crime, low resources, food desert, all of that. So we're right in that.
Nice. And thanks for sharing that. That definitely gives context, especially for like you doing work that has to do with white supremacy culture traits. So what about the makeup? Is your staff, would you consider your staff diverse, or are they?
I think relative, it's all relative. I definitely go to some places where like there's one non-white teacher, so relative to that, it's diverse. It's probably about half, a little under half staff of color, and probably a little more than half white staff, teachers. Our administration is pretty mixed. Our counselors are pretty mixed. Teachers are probably more white, but it doesn't match the kids, right? If it matched the kids, it would be 99.5% staff of color. But there's definitely not that many educators to go around in the U.S. at large. The staff are probably a third really experienced, 20 years or more of 18 years or more of experience, a third kind of in the mid-range around 10 years, and another third just like brand new, anywhere from 1 to 3 years or so. And that way we're mixed too, right? A lot of schools there's very high turnover and high poverty Title I schools, but they've had some longevity here for some years.
Yeah, that's interesting to have it that diverse in terms of like experience. So let's, like, a lot of what we have been doing at Leading Educators is learning and trying to dismantle white supremacy culture traits, of course. And what Laura told me about you because she met you at the National Equity Project, and she was telling me that you're like, you have this blog and you're tackling white supremacy culture traits. So I guess my question is like, why? There's a lot of ways to start these type of equity conversations. What made you decide to go this route?
Mhm. Well, this is now, my fourth year at the school, and my sixth year working in San Francisco, and I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years or so working in schools. And I've seen many attempts at trying to have the talk, right? We just start calling it the talk, the equity talk. And whether that's diversity, or we're going to start with implicit bias, or we're going to take that Harvard test, or we're going to read Glenn Singleton's book, whatever. Like I've seen so many attempts at either opening the conversation, usually opening it because it usually dies off, right? It's usually like a one and done kind of a thing. So, I was scratching my head this year. Actually, rewind. In the beginning of this year, I realized that we needed to talk about space and norms and safety versus brave, right? Brave space, safe space. There's a really good reading out there on that. And we started this conversation to try to talk about brave norms and norms that bring about change and transformation, as opposed to make people feel safe and comfortable. And we tried this when we first came back to school in the beginning of the school year, and the conversation in that particular PD fell flat. People didn't go there. They didn't go deeper. They didn't feel comfortable. People who had stuff to say didn't have stuff to say. So we were literally trying to talk about brave space, but no one was brave enough to even talk about the need for that or wanting to do that. So then, that kind of shut me down. Just made me, I definitely felt a little defeated, right? Just because in this case, we had a reading, and I jumped it off with some good framing and all this kind of stuff, and it still fell flat. And I was like, man, what are we going to do? So I pressed pause for a while, and then someone had slid this white supremacy culture reading to me during that same summer. And I was like, we are not ready for this. I was like, I can talk about this. And I was like, we're not ready to go here. And I just kind of slept on it for a while. And sometime around November, I was like, it's time to do it. Well, first I said we were going to go back and finish this norm conversation because we weren't ready and we were scared. We were going to do it. And then I realized that I needed to connect it to something deeper. So I saw this text and I started thinking about it, and I used that particular framework with a few other spaces, and I just saw that the conversation was different. It was more specific. You couldn't really refute it. You couldn't really check out as much. So I went through a bunch of process of revision to get ready to do this with the whole staff. And the reason I wanted to go there was because I was still searching for something that was deep enough, that was triggering enough that you couldn't write it off as something else. Because everybody can kind of say, oh yeah, I'm working towards equity. Oh yeah, I'm working towards differentiation. Oh, I'm working towards serving all kids. But when you name something or we working towards white supremacy culture or not, all of a sudden people are like, well, I'm not that. I'm not doing that. And then the question is, well, then what is that? And then the cool thing about that particular framework is it at least lays some stuff out, and people say, well, are you about always being right? Or are you not? Are you about having a paternalistic relationship with kids? Or are you not? Or are you about caring about the product and getting things done? Or are you worried about the process and connection? And I've never seen people so interested than they were in this particular topic. And right around the same time, D'Angelo's book comes out, right? And for me, I saw that connection, and I could have, and before we talked about white supremacy culture, we talked about white fragility. Mm-hmm. And some folks had already started that work of reading, and people did their own personal work. So just making that connection between, okay, you have white fragility work, and that's going to prevent you from like having other conversation. Then if you really want to go there, you can talk about this white supremacy culture work. And if you really want to do something about it, you can do something. So kind of laying out some of that spectrum for folks, and also just kind of setting it up so that people couldn't run away from the conversation. Because then it's like someone couldn't get up in the middle of the meeting and be like, man, I'm out of here, because it was like, whoa, that's my fragility, or or they couldn't say, well, I'm feeling really uncomfortable, and I feel like, that's my fragility too. So it was kind of in that way, the timing of that worked out really well. So, you know, part of it's like you're just trying to like make it so that there's no hole, you know, no pitfall to fall in. I think that, you know, I feel like that's the work I've been trying to figure out is how do you do this in a way that there's multiple entry points to it, but it's controlled for the fact that people can't find excuses to leave the conversation, to leave the work, to blame somebody else, to blame a system. It's like, well, no, this is just what you do. And for me, I did a lot of even just like what I do. And I was like, well, let me own some of this and say some of the stuff, how this shows up in my practice as a person, as a leader. So then it was like, well, now even this brown man, the leader, is saying he's doing it, you know, like now it's like, okay, well, what about everything else?
Yeah, it's true, right? Because white supremacy culture traits works for it's just we're so used to it. It works for folks, no matter what your race is. But I have to shout you out for like going right into it, because I think as a Black woman, if it were me, I would be like, oh, I don't want to come across as you know, like even if I wanted to do that with my staff, if I was a principal, I think I would probably talk myself out of it a bit. So I guess my question is like, how did you stay in it instead of like finding those safe routes? Because like you're saying, like when you have conversations about implicit bias, I've heard people say like, oh, it's just my bias. It's just science. It's just how the mind works. It's okay. How they can kind of like, you know, make themselves feel a little bit better about the situation, or like comfort themselves in the dysfunction. So how did you stay in it and like not back out?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was having enough years here to just kind of, I mean, it's hard. Like ideally, like you should be able to start talking about real stuff as soon as you get in the door, right? Like we always talk about, you got to build relationships first. Okay, well, how long does that take though, right? Like how many years I got to build relationships before we can start talking about oppression and racism? And I don't know, I guess for me, it was 4 years. I mean, we were talking about oppression and we were talking about racism, but it didn't really get that specific until we went here. So I think part of it was there was enough kind of groundwork done. And then also, I could at least use that as reference points in the past of like, oh, we did this and we didn't go there. We did this and we didn't go there, right? So now we're going to try this to actually go a little bit deeper. I also just like prepared a lot for it. I went through a bunch of revisions. I mean, I talked through some stuff. Like I'm at the point now where I can kind of wing a lot of stuff, you know, like I can kind of just make some slides, make an agenda, and kind of just talk through most things. But this was kind of one that kind of sent me back to just the craft of adult learning, and also just how to lead also with my own story too, you know? So just a lot of preparation. And, you know, you get to a point where it's just like, man, it's got to happen. It's just got to happen, you know? And also I felt like I also built enough alliances kind of moving up so that like, it wouldn't just be me talking on my own, but there were some more people on board with it. You know, we did the almost exact same set with our leadership team first. And that was like 10 staff members before we did the whole staff. It was like 35, 40 people. So that helped kind of just plant some seeds and get some feedback from some of those folks and get them to at least co-sign some of it, or at least, you know, just be in it.
Yeah. I guess I think it's definitely important to have like some first followers, almost as they call it, with your IoT. How have you sort of made the case around like dismantling dominant culture with student achievement or like student learning? Like how have you made those sort of connections with folks who are just like, just about math, it's just about science or whatever?
Well, you know, we part of it was we established that this purpose and mission and vision work was at the foundation of the other work. So I got this cool framework called the hierarchy of change. It's kind of like systems change at large. It kind of goes from purpose stuff at the bottom, and then it kind of builds up to like practices and ultimately like student achievement and change. So part of it was just explaining that we had been doing all this other work, maybe in the right direction, but not with the right purpose, not with the right foundation. So part of it was also showing that we're getting outcomes that we don't really want to agree with. So instead of just changing the practices, we also have to think about the mindset work underneath that. So just trying to show the connection between what we think, what we believe, with then how our practices, our policies and practices are. So then ultimately what the kids end up doing and what we teach. But this one, so far, it didn't get super deep into the practices yet. It was we gave it some time to be theoretical, right? And some time to be philosophical, so that folks could realize, well, that actually is part of the work. So then now you can now take this framework and then think about your curriculum, your pedagogy, who's talking, who's not talking, why we do restorative justice, right? Like, why are we trying to do that? We're not just trying to do that because we're trying to make suspensions go down. Now we're actually doing it because we're trying to eliminate white supremacy culture in the school. So it's a different call to action than this, school district mandate or, some violation that you're trying to fix or something like that. This is like, what are we about? So actually tomorrow, we are revisiting our mission and vision as a school, just like the actual mission statement. Because I wanted to make sure that in doing this work, it also influenced what we actually named, like on paper, because we can say all these things in meetings, oh, this is who we are now, but what does studying white supremacy culture and thinking about anti-racism and these other things we've been talking about, what does this have to do with our mission? So I'm hoping tomorrow to do some mission revision with the whole staff and just see if we can really name it there. And we'll see, because that also has to be an organic process too, right? For people to own it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is all sounds interesting and good. And I'm like, I have tons of questions, but also I'm like, want to make space so other people can ask questions. So when you think about just in general over these like 4 years that you've been leading for equity and having these sort of conversations, not just only on like white supremacy culture, but also white fragility and bias, like what are you celebrating, and then what are some lessons learned?
I think what I'm celebrating this year in particular is more of the learning being learner driven, right? So in the classroom we talk about student-centered learning, right? And in good adult learning theory says it should be adult driven, right? And I think a lot of times when we're doing equity work or racial equity work, it's top-down driven, right? Top down, or it's external consultant comes in, like, you guys need to get your stuff together, you got to do this, and there's all this pushback, right? Of like, no, I don't want to do that. No, I don't got to do that. I don't want to do. I don't have to do what you say. And we're at the place this year where it seems like people are engaging more in their own shit. Like we had professional learning community set up where people could choose their own topic, and organically, somewhat organically, we had 2 affinity groups. We had we had a PLC affinity group, and we had a white affinity group. And people chose to be in those groups. Some other people didn't, but we had, between our staff of 35 people, we had like 12 or so that were in 2 of those affinity groups all year. I had a conversation with someone who said, yeah, I'm reading this white fragility book just on their own. They're not an affinity group. We're not reading as a staff. And they're like, yeah, and that led me to this other book, and now I'm reading this book. And I was like, okay. And I mean, the crazy story with kicking off this framework, white supremacy culture, was that I thought this was going to be a one and done PD, because this was something I was pushing super hard as a leader. I couldn't buy up all the real estate of PD time. That it was just all me all the time. And I was like, this is going to be my one. This is going to be my one, one of my big ones. And I thought it was going to be this, and we're going to go back to some other stuff. And then that same week, we had a PD on a Tuesday. That same Thursday, we're sitting in our ILT room, and the ILT was like, nah, we're not done with this. And I was like, really? I was like, really? And they said, and we need to keep, white supremacy culture talks about urgency. So we need to, like, why are we being urgent about moving through this? We're not like people that wanted to continue with this. And I was like, okay. And they said, and we want this to be teacher led. And I was like, okay. This is the one you want to lead? You want me out on this? Okay. And then we ended up doing 3 more sessions on this topic, and it was all teacher led, and it was kind of, it went whatever direction they wanted to take it. Then that kind of led us to looking at referrals, discipline policies, and the same conversation of like bias. And now people were looking at it through the right lens, right? So I feel like the biggest celebration is just people wanting to do the work more so than they wanted to before, and people asking questions, right? So we look at the feedback off of some of these meetings, and the feedback says, okay, so now what? What do I do now? Right. And that's where we want people, right? I mean, you want all learners to get to a place where they're saying, okay, well, I'm ready to learn. I'm ready to go. Where do I go for that? And, once that gets opened up, they can read whatever book they want, go to whatever training, and, ideally, they're progressing themselves through it. Pitfalls, just waiting too long, waiting too long. And then also, not knowing the pitfalls, because when you don't know the pitfalls, you fall into them. And it's hard when not many people have engaged in this work because you don't really have that many people to ask, So, definitely wishing I had a long-term plan sooner than later. Other pitfalls, right? I think just the many times we've fallen into white fragility, it's incredible, right? I mean, it's incredible. But if folks don't have the right foundational work to do that, it happens every single time, every single time. So, yeah, it's a work in progress.
Yeah, but it seems amazing. It seems like you're doing some amazing work. So in another life, I did I was going to be a journalist. So I was like creeping on your Twitter page, just doing my research. And I saw that you tweeted, because I was like, let me make sure I was reading through your blog and everything, but I wrote it down. It says, you tweeted this. Leaders set our schools up to ride the wave of teacher passion. Passion will power transformation, not accountability, fear, nor mandates. It's passion. So, do you remember that tweet?
I do, yeah.
Oh, okay, just making sure. I'm gonna give you a difficult time, but so how are you cultivating passion for your teachers in your schools, and even outside of equity? How are you getting teachers passionate about their career? Because thinking about a teacher who's year one. Sometimes around year one, you're like, I think I'm gonna go to law school. Or you're year 19 and you're like, I'm about to do this 1 or 2 more years and then I'm about to start my own knitting company. You know what I mean? How do you get that people to cultivate their passion? How are you doing that?
That's a good question. So I think one of it is unless the passion is unproductive or destructive to children, we just gotta feed people's passion. We gotta find some way to work it in and identify it. Whether that's I'll give you an example. I got a teacher who spent a lot of time in Brazil and is in a capoeira little club and whatever. Okay. So then I find out one of my students is kind of interested in capoeira. So I connect those two, teacher and a student. They're not in the same space. I'm like, oh, you need to go talk to him because he does capoeira and y'all need to connect. So now the student is taking capoeira lessons at a different little clubhouse. And on one day, the teacher and the student is doing capoeira at lunch on the schoolyard. Just that's something that's just but you can leverage that. You never know what that's going to turn into if you just kind of feed it. That's just very, very quick one, but a longer one is just sending people on trips to go visit other schools. People have to get out of their building, whether that is to a school right down the street, right? Or just getting in the plane or driving across the bridge or something like that and going to go see some schools that are doing something interesting, whether that's some really good stuff around social emotional learning or some good project-based learning or some experiential learning, whatever. When people see stuff in other schools, especially when people are doing good stuff at that school and people are on fire about what they're doing, people come back every time excited. Oh, I saw this. We went down to that school down there. They had all this stuff in the hallway. We got to do something in the hallway, cool. All right, let's go do it. So that helps. Definitely sending people to conferences, getting people reading books and doing book clubs and book studies for teachers, just new ideas. And then people got to have time to talk and collaborate because that passion has to be contagious, but if people don't share those passions, they don't have time to talk with each other. They're just, having a good time in their classroom. But if you can leverage that and build on people's interests and whatever their new information is, they can kind of go off and run it. So we send some people down to go visit some schools. They come back, they present to the whole staff, and through that process, one of our teacher pitches this idea of we should all build a tiny house, the whole staff. That sounds crazy, but she's so passionate about this tiny house thing and connecting it to project-based learning, so the teachers learn how to be in a project and do a project for the sake of the students. That whatever that sounds great. Sounds like you're passionate about that. Let's do it. Now how do we kind of build around that and just keep working towards that? A lot of ways to do it.
Yeah, those are great examples. It's almost like teachers have the ability to like bring like their whole selves into that space, so like all their different interests. So those are like great ideas. I know like you also talk some in your blog about like deeper learning, and I think I've heard of that term, deeper learning, but I'm like starting to hear about it a lot more, like deeper learning and equity. How would you? I don't, you don't have like this explicit like sort of but like how do you see deeper learning, and like how do you see it connected to equity?
Well, I mean, the simplest idea is that you either got deep learning or you got shallow learning, right? Right, and that's like, it's like breadth or depth, right? Like either we're running through the content and it's a PowerPoint every day and we're just going to do a test and unit test and a chapter test and a final test, or you're doing something deeper than that. So I feel like baseline, we all learn more when we get to go deeper in something and stop trying to fly through content and pretend like we're memorizing stuff that we're never going to use again. Now, when you apply racial equity or class equity to that, people are doing that, right? They're just doing that in other parts of the city, or they're doing that in other cities, right? Deeper learning and project-based learning and outdoor ed and all this kind of stuff. It's been around for a while. Folks in the suburbs and the private schools are doing that because they knew that was good. They're doing that in Finland, right? They're doing that in some other places. It's just starting to get to the city, right? Because we let this top-down approach to No Child Left Behind take over what we were doing for so long, and we weren't doing that. Now you add a racial piece of that, then there's the idea that kids of color can't do that. Well, they can't go deep. They can't have conversations. We can't trust them to have time on their own. They can't do group work. All these things that they can't do, right? Which are really just racist ideas that we're applying to children and education, right? For me, deeper learning is not just going deeper, but it's also applying it, right? When we talk about good teaching, you're applying what you're learning to something real, whether that's a real life issue or a real world situation, or a college and career type setting, right? And if we get kids doing that, then of course they're going to be interested. We normally don't do that with kids of color and poor kids because we're telling them we're preparing them for bottom sector jobs, something that they don't need. We don't believe they're capable of doing that, so we don't teach them that. So they don't learn that, so they don't do that. So they hate school. Deeper learning also gives you the opportunity to say, well, what are we going to go deep with, right? Because then you can pick, well, these are the things that are really important. These are the things that are really going to resonate with kids. These are the things that kids are really going to gravitate towards, and it gives the teacher a lot more agency in choosing what those things are, as opposed to just flying through this very culturally irrelevant curriculum.
Yeah, that definitely resonates. And I think that you described it really in a way that's powerful and like simple because I've read some things about deeper learning and it seems like, super complex, but I'm like, you're right. Either it's shallow or it's deep. And like, are we giving kids of color opportunities to go deep? Typically, no, right? We're really prepping them for a test, like you're saying. So, thanks for that, because like I said, I think that just really resonates. I want to make sure I have time for people to ask questions. But I think and we'll talk about like other things, like how we can connect with you and like your upcoming workshop. We'll definitely do that after questions and answers. But I'm just wondering, like, looking forward to the upcoming year. What are some of your plans as you continue to lead for equity?
Well, I feel like this year we're finally poised to stop talking about it and start doing something, right? But it wasn't clear before what we needed to be doing, So now the question is, well, is white supremacy culture really alive in our school or not? How do we know, right? And now we can have different things that we're actually looking for, right? So now as we get into deeper learning, or we get into social emotional learning or community building, now we'll have a different lens to look at that kind of stuff, right? So I don't really think that there's new stuff that we need to do or necessarily new ideas to introduce, but I do think it's about checking to see, auditing to see what we're doing and not doing. And it's also about bringing some good stuff back that were good. It was good things that we tried to do, but we dropped it because we didn't really know why we were doing it or what we were doing at the time. So we dropped it, whether that was culturally responsive teaching at the time, or good strategies for English learners, or restorative justice, bringing that stuff back. So that's kind of one of the reasons why we're revising our mission to try to figure out what do we raise up to the top. So then now our plan, our theory of action, our strategic plan actually is aligned with that, so that we actually go do that. I definitely always want to go deeper in the race, right? Just because that is the true divider that's happening in our schools, both with how kids get treated, what the outcomes look like. And I feel like we're at a place where there's more opportunity to do that, and also just more awareness that wasn't there before. Next year is also going to be about the kids. So people brought up real quick, like, oh, this is cool. What about the kids? We were like, well, we're not ready for the kids yet. We need to get our stuff right first, and we need to get clear first before we start bringing all these terms to the kids. Because if you can't hold it together and you don't necessarily know, it doesn't make sense to halfway do this for kids. Because once you open this up, it's going to get real with kids. So people definitely talked about us doing the adult stuff first. So hoping to bring some awareness, some consciousness raising with the kids, some key terms, some projects. I'm hoping to kind of infuse a lot more social justice in our PBL and our deeper learning. But now we'll kind of know why, and now people will be a little bit more bought into culturally responsive teaching, things like that.
Nice. Yeah, it all sounds so exciting. Thanks for answering those questions. I definitely want to give everyone else time to ask any questions that they may have. I sent out the link to your blog, so maybe some folks have questions around this conversation we just had, or maybe even things that they saw on the blog. So I'll open the floor, the virtual floor.
Hi, this is Katie. I'm in New Orleans. I'm wondering about, as you are engaging in this learning, and everyone is obviously in a different place on how they identify and internalize it. And you mentioned you have a diverse staff, which means you probably have people who are managing across difference. And I'm curious how this work and these conversations have impacted the way you think about coaching your coaches or coaching your other leaders, about how they reflect on their interactions as managers across difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some additional conversations that we have to have with various leaders at the school, whether that is my administrative team, my counseling team, and then even my central union team, who are kind of like my teacher leaders, and even my teacher leaders that are like my ILT. So just preparing and how to work through some of that with them is just creating space for them, like you said, to think about how they're doing that. Trying to send folks to as many trainings as we can, because I do feel like people just need to get out and go to some trainings. But you're right, it definitely gets hard with folks not knowing their identity, and also not knowing how to hold that space as a leader leading across that too. Because if we're just doing procedural stuff and trying to get a dance plan, that's one thing. If we're talking about how we show up with each other, that's another thing. I do hope that deeper norms would help. I originally thought that norms of being were the place to start, but I realized that we need to go deeper in something more philosophical than just how we show up, right? We need to establish who we are and what we're working towards. So I do feel like that'll be something that is needed, especially in that space, whether that's a grade level team or a math department team or staff at large.
Joe, what have you learned about yourself as a leader as you started to implement and go even deeper this year, with whether it's with your coaching of your admin team or leading, just in any way? What have you learned about yourself?
Definitely, it feels like I can never be direct enough, Or another way to say that is it is necessary to be really explicit about what we're talking about. And I realized that there's a lot of ideas that I hold in my head because of the process I went through, because of my upbringing, because of my experience in this country, my experience in academia, that I've worked through a whole long time ago, and I'm past that. I'm applying it, right? And I have the vision in my mind of working on what I'm working towards, but I realize as a leader, I need to be very clear and very explicit with kind of what we're doing, right? What does it mean to really be that kind of a school? What does it mean to really be an anti-racist school? What does it mean to not have white fragility? What does it mean to not have a school that's informed by white supremacy culture? And part of that's for me, but then the other piece is like, how do we get explicit as a group, whatever that group is, to identify those things, right? So I've learned that it helps the more explicit I am, but I've also learned that I need to create more space for folks to learn and work through some stuff at a slower pace than I thought was necessary. You know, usually it's like, oh, we got a new idea. Sounds like a good new idea. Let's do it, right? That's just my style, as opposed to, no, we actually got to sit, talk, discuss, process, think about it, and then we'll get to like what we're going to do next. So that part of that's just different styles of being, and also just realizing that with hard stuff, they need some time to think through some stuff.
Everything you're sharing really resonates. I appreciate you being so open and candid about this journey with a group of strangers in a virtual space, which can sometimes be awkward. So thank you. But your response to Precious there made me think of something that some of us have been talking about, and I'm curious what you've learned about. I think the white supremacy culture traits have given us a helpful language for us to observe ourselves more closely and notice how we are acting and engaging and collaborating. And that's been really helpful. I think one challenge related to that is, how do you act differently? What do you do? How do you pivot kind of away from some of those behaviors toward a more equitable way of being? And I'm wondering what you've learned or seen in terms of your staff moving away from some of those white supremacy culture traits toward more productive ways of being. Like, what are some successes or things you've learned about how to help people do that?
I think a lot of it's in the process, you know. We definitely have to rethink the processes we use, right? Something as simple as how we get input before we make a decision, you know. I think that's been some of my learnings. You know, before I was using the term white supremacy culture, my coaches were pushing me around being an inclusive or a top-down leader, right? And how do you become more inclusive, right? And, you know, I pushed back a lot of times on that because I was like, well, I'm doing the right stuff though. Like, why do I got to take so long to do the right stuff? And now that I've been looking at that with this lens of white supremacy culture, it's forced me to change usually how long something takes, but then also not being so attached to what the outcome is, but trying to create a really good process to kind of go through that. And I feel like so much of that could be applied to the classroom too, right? I mean, that's how we go through the learning process, right? Like how we decide what we're learning in the classroom as a teacher. How kids go through a process of just working through a project or doing group work. So I think part of it's just thinking, okay, well, if that's how we normally do, you can almost just really just say, well, what do we normally do? And we know that because that's taught to us and that's habit. Just what's the opposite of that? I mean, that's usually what you could just do, usually. And then, you know, maybe go somewhere in the middle if needed. But usually if you just do the exact opposite of that, you're probably going to end up being in a different kind of place. For me, I use this a lot recently with how we were making some big budget decisions as a school, and how we were going about hiring new staff members, and just also how I was communicating transparency around doing some stuff as a leader, right? And then also trying to like own that and transparently say that with the staff so that folks see me and kind of in some constant revision and some constant reflection on working through that for myself, with the hopes that some of that happens in everyone else's practice too, right? But I can at least model that from my work.
Thank you.
No problem.
Joe, who do you go to for support? Do you have like a team of other teachers or leaders of color that you lean on for thought partnering? And if so, like how important is that to what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of mentors. I mean, I have a lot of mentors and a lot of colleagues that I'll run ideas by, both folks that are other school leaders like me, sometimes folks that are in the school here, the maybe leaders or not leaders, just trying to share stuff with them to see kind of what they think, right? You want to float an idea by people. My direct supervisor this year is a really good coach, which is nice. I also have probably like 4 or 5 years, I've had also a leadership coach too that I run a lot of ideas by her too. I try to go to trainings and conferences and read books and just see what applies. What I can bring. Like, oh, that's a great idea. And the more I've connected with folks online, it's really helped too. Like I had no idea about this anti-racism organization Continuum, right? And then connecting with somebody online, they're like, oh, that sounds like this. Have you heard about it? Like, no, I haven't heard about that. So that sounds cool too. So sometimes when you just kind of get outside and meet people, things kind of come, and people share ideas. But yeah, I definitely ask a lot of people for help, just because some of the stuff is very messy, and very unscripted. So it helps.
Yes, I appreciate that you have talked a lot about timing and how this is a process, a complex process that takes time, investment, and it's important to focus on the process and not the outcome. So, what would you say, in your experience, is a good amount of time that the teacher should invest on professional learning and on collaboration during the school year? And how much time do you think it will take until you start seeing a mindset change that will let you say, okay, we're ready for the students now, if you can say that? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's constant work, right? I think it's knowing that we got to keep working on it, and different people are going to get ready at different times. It's going to take some people multiple sittings at multiple readings of things, multiple conversations before they get to the place of applying, and some people are going to be really quick. I think as long as we create space for folks to talk to each other, folks will be able to share good ideas, right? And people who are a little more aware or a little more experienced at doing something will be able to share that with other people. I do think people have to know that this is life's work, though. This is not, it's not a one PD thing. Just because you read Chris Emdin's book doesn't mean you're done. Or Glenn Singleton's book, right? Like, it's just like, yeah, there's more books. One, keep reading them. Two, keep signing up for trainings, keep engaging in conversation, keep looking at yourself, whether you are someone who is promoting the status quo or promoting transformation, right? As long as we're constantly engaged in that and constantly knowing that we have to decolonize our minds and unlearn the patterns, as long as we know that that's a constant process, we'll keep re-examining that. And I think people who are constantly trying to be better people know that, right? The people who don't really want to engage in that work, they think that it's like, meeting that they can attend or training and that's it. But they just got to know that this is forever, right? So just as while we're building the mindset work, we're also developing our practice and honing our craft while we're still building our mindset, right? And they're parallel lines of work that need to be happening.
We have time for one more question before we figure out how we can keep in contact with Joe and learn about his workshop that's coming up.
Joe, this is Shayna from DC. You actually started answering my question at the latter part of answering that other question. So feel free to just build on what you just said. My question was really around differentiation, and how you keep your whole staff engaged, knowing that, you know, some folks, like you were saying, need a little bit more support than others. And some are like, come on, let's go. I've been waiting for this. I'm ready to act. How do you keep everyone engaged and moving forward? Any other ways that you do that?
I think having more than one space, you know, so we have so many weird spaces at our school, because after we blew up our bell schedule, we ended up with two-hour chunks of time on Tuesday afternoon and Friday afternoon. So kids get out at 1:15, and we have between 1:30 and 3:30 to do all kind of stuff 2 days a week. Right. So between that, we have everything from whole staff meetings to grade level meetings to department meetings to topic driven PLCs that teachers could choose, to open collaboration time for people to just get together when they need to get together. So I do feel like I have learned that with given space, cool things can happen, and people can find a little bit what they need. You definitely, you know, need a little bit of structure and somebody to help point people in the right direction. And then, you know, the other piece is we have to direct folks who are still very early in their consciousness on whatever spectrum, whether that's race or class or gender. Folks have to know that they got to engage in that work outside of the work. You know, it's not all going to happen here. You know, if you got to work on your gender politics, you got to go do some stuff on that. You got to figure that out. And I can't mandate it as a leader, but I could definitely remind folks. I mean, we were doing some of this race work with Right Fragility. Like I said, like some stuff is going to come up, and you know, we're not going to solve it all here. And you got to figure out where you're going to get that from, whether that's from your loved ones, friends, and families, or you need to go join a white anti-racist group on the weekends. Whatever, you got to figure out what you need, and be about pushing your consciousness, because we can't serve everybody in the space. You know. So people just got to know that they got to figure some of that stuff out, and that it's life's work. It's not all going to get solved today, you know?
Amen. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I'm going to share my screen so I can make sure that I'm sharing your.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Well, wait 1 second. Oh my God. Let me stop this share. It's kind of, oh my God. It's like two different, let me fix that. All right, that's better. Sorry about that. Let me try that again. All right, so you wanted to tell us a little bit about, some of us, I don't think there's anyone on the call. Some of us are actually in the Bay Area, so definitely gonna
come through.
Yeah, so definitely we will let people know, but can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing in June?
Yeah, so, you know, this is kind of the, you know, the culmination of some work, at least this past year. I mean, I told you all a little bit about what we're doing as a school, and I've been started sharing some of these ideas in different spaces, and I realized that there's a lot to talk about, obviously, but also people just need more space to share ideas and questions and dilemmas and action plan and all of that. So I wanted to create some time to look at white supremacy culture in schools. So I'm hoping to spend a whole day with folks in some discussion and some reflection, thinking about some long-term planning of both, like, you know, well, how do you do one meeting on this, but, you know, what are you going to do in 3 or 5 years? So I'll be bringing some folks together from across the country to look at a couple frameworks, have some good discussion, and then hopefully just find other people who want to do this work, right, and learn from each other, so that we're not so siloed in some of this very difficult work. I'm hoping this turns into something larger. I definitely have a feeling this should be 2 days, but I'm starting with one. But I'm hoping sometime in the fall to continue this, hopefully offer a 2-day or maybe something kind of like a monthly kind of virtual thing, playing with a couple ideas. But to start, I want to bring some people together for a day of some work deeper than diversity, as I've been thinking about.
Nice. And before we end, how can folks like keep up with you or connect with you if they have further questions?
Yeah, I would say I've been learning that Twitter is some of the place where all this conversation is happening. I was on Facebook for a long time, thinking that Twitter was, just something Donald Trump was doing, But I definitely like Twitter. I've been enjoying just connecting with folks. So you can find me at Truss Leadership, TRUSS Leadership. Stuff on Facebook too. I would say I definitely have been loving blogging. So you can definitely find my blog, cultureresponsive-leadership.com. You can also get to it via joetruss.com, same site. And, just however to connect, whether that's some stuff in person, letting me know if you're going to be at a conference sometime soon, or if you want to come through my training, or I'm even starting to get hit up to go to certain places to do some on-site training. So some of that's in the works for the fall too. So the sky's the limit at this point. But, I just really want to connect with folks because the work is really hard. A lot of times we're doing it alone, and we're doing it as one of my friends calls it, in the belly of the beast. And we just got to get some allies in this work.
Well, thank you so much for taking your lunch break probably to chat with us. Definitely learned so much. And if we had more time, I'll ask you tons more questions, but just really want to express gratitude for giving us the space, and we will be in touch. Thank you so much. And I will send you the recording.
Okay, awesome. Well, nice to meet everybody. Appreciate the time to share and talk. Definitely hit me up. It's definitely a lot of learning in community. So I'd love to hear kind of what y'all are working on and somehow collaborate. Good luck with everything you guys are doing.
Thank you. Have a good day. Have a good week.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everyone.